Intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or another print disability that makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org. Your Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service now presents a reading of articles and features from the Buffalo News for Sunday, June 28th. Your readers for today are
Dan Arth
and Edwin Vieira. First, a look at the weather. For today, sun and some clouds with a couple of showers and a high of 80. Mainly clear tonight and low of 60. It'll be mostly sunny and very warm tomorrow to start off the work week with a high of 86 and a low of 72. Some thunderstorms linger around on Tuesday. It'll be breezy and humid with some sun and clouds as well with a high of 88 and a low of 73. Wednesday, it'll be breezy and humid again with a high of 90 and a low of 73, breaking into some real summer temperatures. Hot again on Thursday with a high of 91 and a low of 73. Very warm on Friday to start the 4th of July weekend with a high of 88 and a low of 70. But on Saturday, we could see a shower or two, throwing some plans into disarray with a high of 83 and a low of 67. Now here's Dan with our first story.
Thank you, Edwin. Our lead story today, utility sues homeowners for access to power lines. National Grid says structures must be removed from North Buffalo yards. Article by Stephen T. Watson. The standoff between a multi-billion-dollar utility and some homeowners in the largest subdivision built in Buffalo in recent years can best be seen from above. Pull up Google Maps, zoom in on the homes on one side of Rachel Vincent Way in North Buffalo, and you'll see high-voltage power lines and poles crossing the backyards. National Grid says it must be able to maintain those lines and to reach them in case of an emergency. But the utility contends fences and sheds and other structures put in by some homeowners make all this but impossible. The company says it spent 6 years negotiating with the home builders and property owners in the Colvin Estates development, but to no avail. Now, National Grid is taking legal action. This has been a long-standing dispute about essentially real property rights that we need to resolve to ensure that our infrastructure is safe and the work on it can continue in a safe and lawful manner. National Grid spokesperson David Bertoli told the Buffalo News, "Our goal here really is not confrontation, but resolution." National Grid is asking a judge to order the removal of any structures within a 30-foot wide strip that runs under the power lines and across the rear of the yards, and require the homeowners to get the utility's permission before building anything new there. The lawsuit names the owners of 29 homes on Rachel Vincent's south side, along with one Colvin Estates developer. Homeowners were surprised to hear of the lawsuit, which was filed Wednesday, and said they were frustrated that National Grid sued them. Several said they worried how a legal victory by the utility would affect their properties and how much it would cost them. "This is ridiculous," said Christine Irene, who has lived on Rachel Vincent nearly 13 years. "If this had been an issue, then they should have stated so at the very beginning of our occupancy at Phase 1. They should have made that known. I had no idea." Railroad bed to subdivision. The Colvin Estates development was built on a 23-acre former railroad bed located between Colvin and Starin Avenues north of Taunton Place in North Buffalo. The property was transferred from Conrail to the control of the Niagara Frontier Transportation Authority, which in 2003 sold it to David Gordon. In 2010, Gordon and Burke Homes began clearing the heavily wooded parcel. Burke Homes constructed 24 patio homes in the subdivision's first phase. Then in 2018, Morano Homes took over with plans to construct another 100 homes. Company officials expected the homes to sell in the mid $300,000 to $400,000 range, but many exceeded $500,000. National Grid's presence at the site goes back 40 years. The utility reached a lease agreement with Conrail in 1986 when the utility first installed high voltage lines there. These sub-transmission lines rise 50 to 55 feet above ground, about 15 feet higher than standard lines. Those running along Rachel Vincent serve the University at Buffalo South campus, Tops Markets on Elmwood Avenue, and some industrial customers. National Grid said its lease with Conrail remained in effect when the NFTA took control of the site and later when the developers began work on Colvin Estates. Exclusive right to access lines. National Grid says it has the exclusive right to access a 30-foot wide strip running under the power lines from Colvin to Starin and through yards on the street's south side. The utility says it needs to reach the lines for routine maintenance and, crucially, in case of power failure or another emergency. The company says the equipment needed to access the high voltage lines is larger than what it uses to reach standard lines and therefore cannot be brought in from Rachel Vincent through the narrow spaces between the homes. Couldn't the company move or bury the lines? Anything's possible with time and money, but who pays for that, Bertoli said. For now, the utility insisted its crews can reach the lines only from Colvin or Starin. National Grid says the problem is that many homeowners put in fences, landscaping, sheds, pools, or play sets within this right-of-way. The biggest issue is the fences because there are so many of them, National Grid Senior Counsel Eric Osenchik said. Attempts at compromise fail. In most cases, the 30-foot wide right-of-way is owned by each Rachel Vincent homeowner, but Dato Development owns the right-of-way section that runs along the backyards of the first 12 homes built on Rachel Vincent's south side, starting in from Colvin. The developer, which shares principal ownership with Burke Homes, has allowed those homeowners to put up fences and other structures in the right-of-way. The issue emerged in fall 2020 when National Grid surveyed the properties containing obstructions and followed up by asking the owners to voluntarily take out the structures. In October 2020, National Grid said it sent letters demanding removal of the unauthorized encroachments by July 1st, 2021. One homeowner shared correspondence from the time sent by Morano and National Grid. The utilities letter mentioned extensions of removal deadlines as negotiations continued. Over to you, Edwin.
From Buffalo News Watchdog, suicide nearly led feds to pull funds from psych center. Facility improved safety, but staffing issues continue. From Dan Herbeck. Officials at the Buffalo Psychiatric Center knew the patient had a history of suicidal behavior and knew they had to monitor him closely to make sure he didn't harm himself. But on June 1st, 2025, a male patient in his 30s took his own life in a shower room. According to a government investigation report on the incident, he suffocated himself with a plastic bag from a food service delivery to a psychiatric center employee. The following month, on July 17th, another male patient who was supposed to be watched closely hanged himself with a bedsheet. In this case, Buffalo Psychiatric Center employees used cardiopulmonary resuscitation to save his life. Those two incidents last year raised patient safety concerns and nearly led the federal government to stop Medicaid and Medicare funding to the 145-year-old state mental hospital. Buffalo News has learned through government documents and employee interviews. After a string of disturbing incidents at the state facility at 400 Forest Avenue, the federal agency that administers Medicare and Medicaid asked the state health department to investigate questions about patient safety. A grim aftermath. Investigators visited the facility operated by the State Office of Mental Health last July and August, questioning employees, patients, and leaders of the facility. Ultimately, the facility was allowed to continue receiving federal funding after psychiatric center leaders agreed to make safety improvements, including visual inspections of every patient at 15-minute intervals, better training for staff members, and a promise to keep plastic bags out of reach of patients at all times, according to a bulletin sent by the facility's managers to workers in November. Grim was the word used by BPC managers to describe the situation in the bulletin. Although this seems grim and it feels like we're fighting an uphill battle, we know we can move mountains if we all work together, leaders wrote to workers at the center. We are resilient and we will overcome this moment in time. It was a nerve-wracking time for the people who care for psychiatric patients in the 188-bed facility, one of the center's 647 employees told the news. We were all made aware if we don't make changes, we're going to be shut down. The government's going to cut off our access to federal funding, said the worker, who spoke on the condition that he or she would not be identified by name. Managers of the center worked closely with employees and their union leaders to come up with changes that would convince the U.S. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services to continue reimbursement for patient care, Lovette Moutry said. Moutry is a longtime worker at the center, who also serves as president of Local 403 of the Civil Service Employees Association. The psych center got through it, but they had to hurry and implement changes, important changes. We were made aware that these changes were very important to the future of the facility, she said. Moutry said she continues to work with BPC management on solutions for staffing shortages, concerns about worker and patient safety, and other challenges that face the center. Patient says he's being silenced. Gary A. Marzoff Jr., a patient at the Buffalo Center, claims he was a witness and a, quote, key whistleblower in the investigation last year. Marzoff told the news he began cooperating in the probe after witnessing a suicide in the facility last summer. Marzoff claims state officials are punishing him and trying to, quote, silence him because he spoke openly with investigators. He maintains it was his phone call to state officials that began the suicide investigation. They're forcing me to take medications, they're trying to harm me, and they're trying to keep me here as a patient against my will, Marzoff, age 58, said last week. He's filed a lawsuit seeking his release from the center. Although Marzoff has had issues with drug and alcohol addiction for years, he has never once physically harmed any person, said his father, Gary A. Marzoff Sr. of Lackawanna. We believe they should release him, and we have room for Gary in our home, Marzoff Sr. said in an interview. He's not a dangerous or violent person. A spokesman for the State Office of Mental Health, which runs the Buffalo Center and 22 other inpatient psychiatric centers, declined to comment on Marzoff's claims, citing issues of patient privacy. Speaking in general terms about his agency's policy, spokesman Justin Mason said the OMH would never tolerate any kind of retribution against a patient who cooperates in an investigation. On June 21st, the news reported on another lawsuit Marzoff has pending against the State Office of Mental Health, claiming that one of its workers in Rochester initiated a romantic and sexual relationship with him that lasted more than a year. He claimed that the state employee sometimes rented hotel rooms in Buffalo where she and Marzoff would meet to have sex, drink alcohol, and snort cocaine. Mental health officials from the state declined to comment on that lawsuit, but state lawyers filed court papers that denied any wrongdoing. Officials of the State Office of Mental Health and the Health Department and the Federal Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services all verified the information a news reporter received about last year's suicide and attempted suicide at the Buffalo facility and the investigation that ensued. Like all OMH facilities, the Buffalo Psychiatric Center maintains a patient-centered environment that places safety and recovery-oriented care as a top priority. The Buffalo Psychiatric Center promptly addressed all concerns to the satisfaction of the CMS, and our facility continues to operate in good standing, Mason said. It was the first patient suicide at the Buffalo Psychiatric Center since the 1980s, Mason noted. Texas facility loses funding. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services is headed by Dr. Mehmet Oz, a high-profile supporter and appointee of President Donald Trump. Earlier this year, the agency took federal reimbursement away from the largest psychiatric facility in Texas, the Laurel Ridge Treatment Center in San Antonio. Oz's agency announced on April 15th Laurel Ridge would lose its access to Medicare and Medicaid funding due to violations of patient health and safety regulations. Texas Public Radio reported the federal action came after a government probe into 3 patient suicides at Laurel Ridge. In late April, Laurel Ridge announced it was laying off most of its workforce of more than 650 employees and launched an appeal of the federal agency's actions. Laurel Ridge, which, unlike the Buffalo Center, is privately owned, is working with the federal government to get recertified as a recipient of Medicare and Medicaid, a company spokeswoman told the news. But understaffing can be dangerous. Understaffing has been a chronic problem at the Buffalo Psychiatric Center for many years, said Moutry, who represents about 400 patient care workers at state facilities in Buffalo and West Seneca. Treatment assistants who care for patients in Buffalo sometimes find out during their work shifts that they'll be required to work a 16-hour shift that day because of insufficient staffing, Moutry said. It can be a challenge for anyone to do their work properly when working a 16-hour shift, she said. In addition to that, some of the patients in the facility are difficult to control and dangerous, not only to workers but other patients, Moutry said. She recalled an incident in April 2024 when 3 workers at the center's Strozzi building were stabbed repeatedly in what police called an unprovoked attack by a patient, Calvin Haskins, age 34. The attack occurred in an outpatient housing area that was not equipped with metal detectors, and Haskins used a knife he had hidden in his sock, police said. Police said the same assailant was arrested in downtown Buffalo in 2013 after a man waiting for a Metro Rail train was stabbed 17 times. Charged with attempted murder in the psychiatric center attack, Haskins was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in state prison. None of the 3 people injured in that attack have returned to work with the psychiatric patients, Moutry said. That incident was traumatic, especially to those 3 workers, but also to everyone who works at the center.
And you're listening to a reading of today's Buffalo News on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. The time is 9:15 a.m. for those listening in the morning and 4:15 p.m. for those listening in the afternoon. Our next article from the front page of the Buffalo News: Allentown restaurateur brings soccer fields hope to Ukraine. Article by Catherine Fitzgerald. When 6:30 p.m. rolls around and reservations arrive at Labyrinth, a themed pre-dinner experience in Allentown, it's go time for Cameron Sinclair. Since Labyrinth opened in the fall, Sinclair and his wife and co-founder Bethany Holbreich have prepared bites, cocktails, games, and more at their Allen Street location. Their mission is to bring patrons together in a new and unusual ways. It's a common theme in each of their lives. That passion led Sinclair into a sports-based project known as Football for Life that has improved lives in a war-torn nation halfway across the world. Sinclair has always aimed to tie together his loves of soccer, football as he calls it, and philanthropy. Thus, Football for Life was born. The nonprofit builds adaptive sports facilities in conflict or crisis areas. Lately, the group's work has been in war-torn Ukraine. In Europe, and particularly in Sinclair's native United Kingdom, artificial turf fields are replaced every few years. Sinclair and his Football for Life partner, program lead Liam Sullivan, have found a way to upcycle the discarded turf. It's just like a huge environmental waste, Sinclair told the Buffalo News. We were like, what if we just commandeered a few trucks, drove them into Ukraine, and actually started building pitches for displaced kids and other groups who needed kind of activities? One thing led to another. We've now done 50 pitches. In the run-up to the World Cup earlier this month, Football for Life was recognized by the Veterans Coalition International, a U.S.-based nonprofit with partners around the world, at the Salute to Bravery Awards in London, a testament to the work that had been done in Ukraine. Sullivan knows the unifying power of the sport, in part because of how accessible it is. It's the best game in the world. That's what it is, Sullivan said. It's a ball and you run around and you think you're Lionel Messi, or you think you're Pele, and you run around and you pretend, and you can play on your own in the garden, and basically it just unites people. It's bizarre. It's really bizarre. Soccer's popularity transcends borders, and for people who grew up loving the sport, soccer can be a means of healing after catastrophic events. In Ukraine, Football for Life has a large focus on working with veteran amputees. Sinclair said amputees often go through a similar post-war process. First, there's the amputation process itself. Then there's getting used to the prosthetic. But after that, amputees often return home and find a new set of challenges, physical and psychological. I think this is the hardest part. It's like the return to the place that you used to be at. And in a lot of rural parts of Ukraine, it's not like they have the rehabilitation support, Sinclair said. And so these teams have formed up, these soccer teams, co-ed soccer teams have formed together, and they've kind of created a kind of sense of belonging. They are so much stronger than you can imagine. Sinclair said he views his role as something to help empower the people on the ground in Ukraine who have found themselves at war with Russia for more than 4 years. We actually recently started engaging some of the amputee veterans to do the actual building and building some of the pitches, Sinclair said. And so, really nice circle there. But it's not just helpful on an individual level. Sinclair and Sullivan see what the new pitches do for the extended community.
And now on to world news. U.S. and Iran trade attacks while peace deal stays in place, from Reuters. A tanker reported being struck by a projectile in the Strait of Hormuz on Saturday, Britain's Maritime Security Agency said, after the United States and Iran each launched strikes in the worst escalation since they signed their interim peace deal. The warring sides each accused the other of violating the agreement they reached only 2 weeks ago. Washington said it hit Iranian targets overnight, while Iran said it had struck targets linked to U.S. forces on Saturday in response. Saturday's attack on a tanker in the Strait followed an attack on a cargo ship on Thursday that triggered the escalation. Iran has made a fresh bid to assert control over the world's most important energy shipping route, which has begun to reopen over the past 2 weeks after 4 months of disruption. Britain's UKMTO Maritime Security Agency said the tanker that was hit on Saturday had sustained damage to its bridge with all crew reported safe. The Joint Maritime Information Center, run by a coalition of navies protecting shipping, said it had raised its security threat level as a result of recent incidents. Iran has not directly commented on reports of specific attacks on ships, but Iranian state television reported that the Revolutionary Guards had fired, quote, warning shots towards unspecified ships, attempting to pass through channels not approved by Iran, and that this was now prompting other ships to seek Iranian permits before attempting to cross the strait. Earlier, Iran's foreign ministry said it had launched defensive attacks on U.S.-linked military targets, while Bahrain, which hosts the U.S. Navy's regional headquarters, reported an Iranian drone attack. The U.S. military did not immediately respond to the reports. Iran asserts control. Iran has accused the United States of failing to uphold the interim agreement, in particular by failing to sustain a promised ceasefire in Lebanon, which U.S. ally Israel invaded in March in pursuit of the Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah. Israel and Lebanon have repeatedly agreed to U.S.-brokered ceasefire deals, the latest of which was announced on Friday. But these have so far only limited overall impact, with Israel insisting it will not withdraw from a swath of territory. It has seized, and Hezbollah repeatedly rejected calls to give up its arms as long as Israeli troops remain in place. On Saturday, Hezbollah leader Naim Qassem rejected the latest U.S.-brokered security agreement, describing it as a surrender to Israel. In the latest example of ongoing hostilities, despite repeated ceasefires and agreements, Israel launched a drone strike in Lebanon's south. More than 1 million Lebanese have been driven from their homes with a conflict that has run in parallel with the wider Iran war. The framework agreed to on Friday provides for a phased Israeli withdrawal from some parts of southern Lebanon, alongside the deployment of the Lebanese army. But Israeli forces would be permitted to remain in an expanded security zone for the time being, pending further implementation. In a statement, Qassem called it, quote, null and void, and accused the Lebanese government of making unilateral concessions and undermining Lebanon's sovereignty. He criticized provisions linking Israel's withdrawal to Hezbollah's disarmament, saying they effectively legitimized Israel's military presence and crossed all red lines. The group would continue its armed resistance, he added. We did not leave the battlefield in the most difficult circumstances, and we will not leave it. The Israeli military told Reuters it had carried out the strike using a drone because it had no troops in the immediate area. It said it targeted an individual who posed a threat to its forces without giving further details or evidence. Qassem said the Iran-U.S. Memorandum of Understanding, which guarantees Lebanon's territorial integrity, should serve as the basis for ending the conflict rather than Friday's Washington agreement. But Iran points to the U.S. Mohsen Rezai, an advisor to Iran's supreme leader, said the United States violated the war-ending Memorandum of Understanding by supporting what he called proxy forces in the region and creating tensions in the Strait. Throughout the war, Iran has responded to U.S. attacks by hitting neighboring Gulf states that host large U.S. military bases. Iranian state television said the Revolutionary Guards had delivered a decisive response after U.S. forces hit a communications tower in the port city of Sirk. Iran's Mehr News Agency said the Iranian port was operating normally with no damage reported to facilities or equipment.
Our next world story. Quake crisis, also a test for Venezuela's Rodriguez. Her competency in a post-Maduro world coming into question. Article by Bloomberg. The earthquakes that struck Venezuela on Wednesday have become the first major political test for acting President Delcy Rodriguez, with the disaster quickly evolving into a contest over competence. By Friday afternoon, the official death toll had risen to nearly 1,000, and authorities reported nearly 3,400 injured people as Rodriguez's administration races to rescue victims, restore infrastructure, and secure international assistance. The opposition is mounting its own support operation that includes organizing the humanitarian response, creating rival platforms to locate missing people, and coordinate aid. The competing efforts underscore how disaster relief is a key battleground for legitimacy in post-Maduro Venezuela. How Rodriguez handles the crisis is likely to shape the future of her administration after the U.S. operation that removed strongman Nicolás Maduro from power in January. An effective response might help build support behind her, while a faltering one stands to deepen public frustration and strengthen opposition led by Maria Corina Machado. For Rodriguez, the emergency is simultaneously a risk and an opportunity, said Venezuelan political analyst Benigno Alacarn in a report. If the response is rapid and transparent, the interim government can recover performance legitimacy. If it is opaque, militarized, exclusionary, or corrupt, social cost, international pressure, and probability of fractures will increase. Natural disasters offer governments an immediate opportunity to demonstrate state capacity or expose its limits. History offers a mixed record for Rodriguez. In 1999, Hugo Chavez faced the devastating Vargas tragedy when torrential rains and mudslides killed tens of thousands in what is now La Guerrero state. While the disaster cemented Chavez's image as a hands-on leader, his government rejected offers of military assistance from the U.S. Rodriguez's government has publicly welcomed offers of help from countries across the political spectrum, including the U.S. and allies of Donald Trump like Chile, Ecuador, Paraguay, and El Salvador, signaling a more pragmatic approach to international cooperation. Equally, when catastrophic floods and landslides killed dozens and destroyed thousands of homes in La Tajeros in 2022, Maduro broke years of relative isolation to make repeated visits to the disaster zone, promising government help. Yet at the time, it was widely viewed as an effort to rebuild his standing ahead of the 2024 presidential election after nearly a decade of economic collapse and political turmoil. No authorities present. Mariano Villanilla, a 35-year-old university professor in Caracas, said she had seen no authorities in the Chacao neighborhood where she lives. Residents in her building were instead organizing privately to hire engineers to check if its structure was safe. We haven't heard anything about what we should do, Villanilla said via WhatsApp. People outside Venezuela are likely to know more about what is happening than those inside the country, she added. Johnny Montoya, 62, was with his panicked 84-year-old mother in El Rosal, an upscale business district in eastern Caracas, when the quakes hit. He expects little from Rodriguez's leadership in the crisis, calling her government a criminal gang that has done worse than an earthquake. A doctor at Hospital Miguel Perez Carina shared photos of 8 handwritten pages listing injured patients, saying the hospital was overwhelmed. She circulated the names in hopes that families could locate missing relatives. Venezuela's hospitals have been depleted by years of crisis, with shortages of medicine and basic medical supplies. By Friday, civil society stepped in as relief efforts struggled to gain momentum. With heavy machinery still scarce and official aid slow to arrive, Caracas residents headed to La Guardia carrying pickaxes and shovels to dig for people believed to be trapped beneath the rubble.
You're listening to a reading of today's Buffalo News on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. The time for our morning listeners is 9:30 a.m., and for our afternoon listeners, the time is 4:30 p.m. And now on to national news. Vandalism claims at reflecting pool don't seem to hold water, from Gracie Abernathy. After complaining about the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool's appearance, President Trump launched a renovation project to paint the pool's bottom, quote, American flag blue. But the pool once again is plagued by algae, and its coating is peeling, something Trump blames on vandalism. Trump has said vandals slashed the pool with a knife, leaving a cut he is variously described as 150, 250, 300, and 350 feet long, respectively. The 300-foot gash made by a very sharp knife or razors is actually numerous slashes over a very long 350-foot length, he said in a Truth Social post on Tuesday, a day after telling reporters proof of the vandalism would be provided in court. When asked for evidence of vandalism and the gash, the Trump administration pointed PolitiFact and other journalists to several things. The Interior Department, White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt's interview on Fox News in which she blamed vandals, and video surveillance footage of people bending over the pool's edge. A White House press release issued Thursday included a link to a TMZ DC co-managing editor posted on X, which appears to show a white lining throughout a pool. But the pool's renovations. Foundational issues have afflicted the pool since it was created in the 1920s. Pipes that are intended to facilitate filtration to prevent algae and murky water and maintain the reflective water level are leaking, but that problem was not addressed in Trump's recent renovations, the New York Times reported. Two construction firms with ties to Trump were granted no-bid contracts for the renovations, which started in April. Atlantic Industrial Coatings, which previously worked on the Trump National Golf Club, was awarded a $14.7 million contract to add a blue sealant to the pool floor and repair the expansion joint seals. Greenwater Services, owned by John J. Cafaro, who donated $250,000 to the Trump Victory Committee in 2020, received a $1.7 million contract to upgrade the water purification system. The pool reopened on June 6th, but less than a week later, after the water turned green from algae. Algae excels in sun-exposed, shallow, stagnant water, and overactive algae is now a problem at the monument. It's unrealistic to eliminate all algae growth in the reflecting pool, Jason Davison, an assistant professor of civil and environmental engineering at Catholic University, told PBS. National Park Service workers have put hydrogen peroxide into the water and are using equipment to try to eliminate the algae. So what's causing the peeling? Signs of problems with the new coating emerged before Trump's recent vandalism allegations. In May, Interior Department staff noticed defects in the blue coating, including bubbling and small holes, the New York Times reported. The pool has a polyurea coating, which is a rubber-like material. Steve Goodall, an aquatic systems consultant known online as Swimming Pool Steve, told PolitiFact that although creating a gash in polyurea coating is not impossible, he has a hard time imagining a tool that could cause more than superficial damage. If the lining was cut with a knife, water could infiltrate the space between the sealant and the concrete, resulting in peeling. However, at the pool, a PolitiFact reporter saw no visible gash. Officers there could not point the reporter to the alleged gash, and it's not visible from National Park Service monument video feeds, which provide a view of the pool from the top of the Washington Monument. Trump said vandals might have put fertilizer into the water, causing the lining to peel. Goodall said it was highly unlikely fertilizer would affect the lining's integrity. Polyurea is naturally resistant to chemicals, and because the pool is so large, any non-industrial amount of substance added would likely have little to no effect. Goodall told PolitiFact one of the most common failures in polyurea coatings is inadequate surface preparation. If the concrete isn't fully dry, then vapor pressure may build up between the sealant and the concrete, resulting in peeling. But have there been any arrests? In the Thursday press release, the White House said 7 people were cited, 7 people arrested, and that there were 18 police reports for vandalism. PolitiFact asked the White House and the Interior Department for arrest records, but received none. Davey Hearn, a 3-time Olympian canoeist, told the Washington Post he was arrested and charged with a misdemeanor for destruction of federal property. Hearn told the Post he saw a detaching lining and reached in to feel it. He denied peeling or destroying anything and described being quickly arrested after taking his hand out of the pool, then detained for 5 hours. Gabby Scott, Hearn's legal representative, told PolitiFact, "There was no crime," she said. "People have interacted with the reflecting pool for decades, and denouncing ordinary behavior as criminal diverts attention from the real questions of how this project was managed." Trump has said destroying or attempting to destroy the pool is punishable by 10 years in prison. The maximum sentence for federal property destruction is 10 years in prison and up to $250,000 in fines if $1,000 or more in damage occurs. Sarah Bronlin, a George Washington University law professor specializing in property and historical preservation law, says, "It seems very unlikely any court would impose the maximum sentence, much less any sentence at all, for the alleged violations."
Our next national news story: mistrial declared for man accused in Palisades fire. Article by Brittany Mejia and Rebecca Ellis, Los Angeles Times. A mistrial was declared Friday in the federal trial of a 30-year-old former Uber driver accused of setting what would become the most destructive wildfire in the history of Los Angeles. Jonathan Rinderknecht was on trial for destruction of property by means of fire, arson affecting property used in interstate commerce, and timber set afire. But on Friday, the 13th day of trial, U.S. District Judge Anna Huang declared a mistrial after the jurors said they were unable to reach a verdict on any of the felony charges, with a final vote of 10-2 for acquittal. The court finds there's a manifest necessity to declare a mistrial in this case due to a jury deadlock, Huang said. First Assistant U.S. Attorney Bill Esseley said on X that his office would retry the case. The evidence is strong that Jonathan Rinderknecht is responsible for igniting the fire on January 1, 2025, which eventually became the Palisades Fire. We fully intend to retry this case before a new jury and obtain guilty verdicts on all charged counts. Huang ordered Rinderknecht to remain in custody and scheduled a new trial for October 19th. Outside the courtroom, defense attorney Steve Haney said the jury was not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt, and it wasn't even close. In a news conference later, he added that a hung jury on a 10-2 verdict, to be frank, in most districts you're not going to have a retrial, but you will in this district. Rinderknecht's father, who attended the whole trial, said he was disheartened by the judge's decision to keep his son in custody. "We know from day one our son is innocent," said Joel Rinderknecht, flanked by his 2 other children. "It feels like the government is just taking him as a scapegoat." Juror number 4, who identified herself only by her first name, Serena, said her vote was not guilty. She cited some of the points Haney had hit on during his defense, including a lack of cell phone data showing Verizon phones in the area, something that could have identified other potential suspects, and gaps of time in surveillance footage. "There's just not enough proof, a lot of holes," the 49-year-old said. "Without the proof and all the doubts, I can't say for sure that he's guilty." When asked about the government's plans to retry the case, Serena called it a waste of our American dollars. Jurors first indicated that they were at an impasse on Thursday afternoon after deliberating for more than 13 hours. The jury had initially indicated they'd reached a unanimous verdict, but in a follow-up note said they were at a standstill and unsure how to proceed. Serena said the foreperson thought the verdict form said ununanimous, which led to the earlier error. During the trial, prosecutors called more than 30 witnesses who painted a picture of a man spiraling mentally and seeking vengeance against the wealthy when he hiked to a clearing overlooking Pacific Palisades and allegedly used a lighter to set the Lockman fire on January 1st, 2025. Prosecutors said the Lockman fire smoldered underground for a week before exploding into the deadly Palisades fire. Firefighters had thought they had extinguished the initial blaze and packed their equipment out the following day. The secondary inferno erupted on January 7th, 2025, killed 12 people, destroyed 6,500 structures across the Palisades and Malibu, and cost billions of dollars in damage and insurance claims.
You're listening to a reading of today's Buffalo News on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. The time for our morning listeners is 9:40 a.m. For our afternoon listeners, the time is 4:40 p.m. And now on to business news. Drop in cross-border traffic hurting duty-free shops. The situation is dire. For decades, the pull of duty-free stores was strong. Every weekend, Canadian shoppers would come to the U.S. to take advantage of lower prices, deeper inventory, and streamlined sales tax at American stores. They would stay overnight, at least 48 hours, which would allow them an $800 Canadian duty-free exemption on personal goods when returning to Canada. While in town, Canadians would fill their gas tanks at our gas stations, fill their bellies in our restaurants, and then, on their way back to Canada, they would stop at our duty-free stores to pick up beer, booze, designer perfumes, and other goodies, all tax and duty-free. But now, with cross-border trips plummeting over the past 2 years, duty-free shops are hurting. A sustained drop in cross-border trips between Ontario and Western New York has gutted the business model duty-free shops depend on, and stores along the Niagara Frontier are now fighting to survive on a fraction of the traffic they once had. Also cutting into duty-free sales are changing shopper preferences and a shift in consumer behavior. Now that a consumer with a smartphone can quickly and easily compare prices on the spot, many are opting to score bargains online instead. The situation is dire, said Barbara Barrett, Executive Director of the Frontier Duty Free Association. New reports suggest the problem is worse than originally thought. Researchers at the University of Toronto analyzed anonymized cell phone activity from Canadian devices visiting 266 U.S. metropolitan areas between April 1st, 2024 and March 31st of this year. They found a median 42% year-over-year drop in visits. This is even worse than the 25% decline in border crossing data reported by Statistics Canada for the same period. The authors say their research suggests officials' counts are not fully capturing the reduced Canadian presence, particularly for non-tourism travel. For months, visitors to the duty-free stores in Fort Erie, Ontario saw visible signs of just how bad things had gotten. A walk through the duty-free store on the Canadian side of the Peace Bridge as late as 2 weeks ago showed just how low its inventory had dwindled throughout much of the shop, while some racks and shelves were filled to bursting with candy, clothing, and travel essentials. Whole aisles of alcohol and wine were empty. A back area that was once home to Canadian souvenirs was completely bare. Cosmetics and fragrances were stocked spottily at best. But the scarce merchandise was only temporary, said Justin Guay, Vice President of IGL Duty Free, owner of the new replacement tenant in the Fort Erie space, now called Duty Free at Peace Bridge. The previous tenant, Peace Bridge Duty Free, entered receivership last year, leaving the Fort Erie store's shelves half-stocked until IGL Duty Free took over the space on June 1st. The previous tenant said it never made up its losses when border crossings were halted during the COVID-19 pandemic. It eventually owed millions of dollars in debt, including what landlord Buffalo and Fort Erie Public Bridge Authority said was $17 million in overdue rent. The Royal Bank of Canada claimed to be owed more than $3 million. The losses were compounded when cross-border traffic steeply and abruptly stopped at the beginning of 2024. The duty-free shop in Fort Erie historically employed 90 people. Now it's down to just 25, but the new owner said it will bulk up staffing. Meanwhile, the new owner is confident it can succeed with a fresh start. Guay has more than 25 years' experience in Canada's duty-free retail industry. We're cleaning it up and stocking it up, and we've got some promotions, some fresh people coming in, and we're looking forward to what's ahead.
All right, personal finance story. Student loan plans are changing. Borrowers urged to take action. Learn what options are available. Article is by Katie Gunther. The new federal spending bill passed in July 2025 introduced significant changes to many federal student loan repayment plans. That includes ending the Grand Plus loan program that enabled graduate and professional students to borrow more on top of direct loans. These changes could affect millions of borrowers who carried an average of $33,770 in student debt in 2025, according to the Education Data Initiative. These policies will begin to take effect July 1st. People can check the status of their repayment plans and explore their options at studentaid.gov. That's studentaid.gov. Plans ending. Starting July 1st, the federal government will start notifying the 7.5 million borrowers enrolled in SAVE to exit the plan and enroll in another one within 90 days. Those who don't enroll in another plan in that 90-day period will be automatically enrolled in either the standard repayment plan or the new tiered standard plan. If a borrower wants to switch plans before being notified, they can contact their loan servicer to switch at any point, according to the Department of Education. Borrowers under the SAVE plan could choose to apply for or recertify under the income-based repayment, income contingent repayment, or pay-as-you-earn plans. The PAYE, P-A-Y-E, and ICR repayment plans will be phased out. Borrowers under the PAY and ICR plans can remain there until July 1st, 2028, as long as the borrower doesn't receive a direct loan on or after July 1st, 2026. Those paying direct loans through PAY or ICR must switch to paying them under the Repayment Assistance Plan, IBR, or Standard Graduated or Extended Repayment Plan starting July 1st, 2028. New plans, 2 repayment plans will be created. RAP will be based on the borrower's income and number of dependents. The tiered standard plan will be based on the borrower's loan balance, and be available in fixed terms of 10, 15, 20, and 25 years. People on the tiered standard plan will not qualify for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Melissa Brennan, a financial planner based in the Dallas area with the ARS Private Wealth, recommended selecting a plan based on income rather than a fixed term if borrowers have the option. You want to maintain flexibility, she said. Keep your payment less than what you can really afford, but then overpay aggressively. Loan limits. Graduate, professional, and parent borrowers will see new loan limits for those issued on or after July 1st. Graduate student loans will be capped at $20,500 annually with a total loan cap of $100,000. Professional student loans at $50,000 annually with a total loan cap of $200,000, and parent plus borrowers at $20,000 annually with a total cap of $65,000 per dependent. The Department of Education will stop issuing new loans through the Graduate Plus program. This means new enrollees pursuing graduate or professional programs will be limited by the direct loan cap, even if the cost of their tuition exceeds that amount. This could pose a challenge for these students who may have to resort to private student loans that have higher interest rates, Brennan said. Some professional or graduate borrowers may qualify for an interim exception.
As part of our newspaper reading, we now present the day's death listings. If you need further information on any of these names, please call us at 716-821-5555. That number again is 716-821-5555. Ronald E. Barron Sr., Eugene Paul Bogucki, Donald Ray Borden, Joanne Court Boscat, Robert Fuzzy Brandt Sr., Arlene Chase ni Pariola, Rita E. Chiambor ni Makowitz, Mary Kokelman, Paul E. Draws, Dennis J. Gold Sr., Susan C. Gurney, Nancy A. Haggerty ni Argus, Anna Maria Hogirl ni Murphy, Denise C. Hall ni Massett, Dominic J. Letieri, Jeffrey J. Lutz, Vera P. Maines ni Smith, Donald Chemnitzer, Michael Kemp, Timothy J. McAuliffe, Jr., Patricia A. McCartan, nee Peters. Neil M. Melbroad. Deborah L. Mercurio, nee Cox. Russell J. Milcarrick. Joseph A. Muley. William R. Page. Thomas Allen Palmer, Esquire. Kathleen A. Parlato, nee Morgano. Frank J. Perrone. Michael A. Piscitello. Matthew R. Pitcairn. Diane J. Pohl. Carolyn Ruth Priest, Sadler. Mary Ellen Roble, Simons. Roy G. Robinson III. Kenneth Schmidt. June M. Schupbach, nee Monin. Edwin G. Shelp. Marcia Simpson. Lawrence E. Susia. Stanislaw Swasha. Lorraine P. Tertiarelli, nee Sijak. Eleanor T. Verbanik, nee Todorov. Alyssa L. Vogelsang. Edward E. Vrana. Angeline Webb. Michelle Marie Webb. John Colton Wiskup. Robert J. Zeeb. If you need further information on any of these names, call us at 716-821-5555. That number again is 716-821-5555.
Thanks, Edwin. Moving over to horoscopes. So happy birthday to those born today, June 28th, 2026. You are people-oriented. Yet, 1 minute you're extroverted, optimistic, and empathetic, and the next you're withdrawn and introverted. This year, you will reap the benefits of all your hard work. Expect a promotion, kudos, awards, and the limelight. And the stars, the number of stars, will show the kind of day that you will have. 5 stars is a dynamic day. 4 stars, positive day. 3, average. 2, so-so. 1, it's going to be a difficult day. So for those born March 21st to April 19th, Aries, that's 4 stars today. You are creative and can do almost anything with your hands without training. Tonight, discussions. Taurus, for those born April 20th to May 20th, today is a 4-star day. This is a sociable time. Enjoy entertaining. Give yourself a chance to learn new things because this will please you, especially because you're ready to work hard to boost your earnings. And tonight, check your finances. Gemini, those born May 21st to June 20th, it's a 4-star day. Fiery Mars enters your sign today to stay until mid-August. This happens once every 2 years. Mars will boost your confidence and energy and make you work hard. Tonight, cooperate. Cancer, those born June 21st to July 22nd. It's a 4-star day. You have the Sun, Mercury, and lucky Jupiter all in your sign, with Jupiter giving you divine protection. Tonight, healthy choices. Leo, those born July 23rd to August 22nd. It's a 4-star day. Although this is an excellent week to buy wardrobe items for yourself, not today. There's a moon alert all day. Nevertheless, it's a wonderful day to schmooze. Tonight, socialize. Virgo, those born August 23rd to September 22nd, it's a 4-star day. This is a wonderful day to schmooze because it's a moon alert. It's not a good day for serious discussions or decisions. Tonight, relax. Those born September 23rd to October 22nd, Libra, it's a 4-star day. Kind of getting a pattern here. You feel a strong need to share your ideas. If you want to make travel plans, wait until tomorrow to act because there's a moon alert in effect all day. Tonight, conversations. Scorpio, those born October 23rd to November 21st, That's a 3-star day. Be careful because you might be having money discussions today. You will also be tempted to shop. Tonight, check your money. Sagittarius, those born November 22nd to December 21st. That's a 4-star day. Today, the moon is in your sign, giving you an advantage over all the other signs. However, there is a moon alert in effect all day. Tonight, you are strong. Capricorn, those born December 22nd to January 19th. That's a 3-star day. You will enjoy playing things low key today because your privacy is important to you. But whatever happens, be aware that there is a moon alert in effect all day. Tonight, focus on privacy. Aquarius, those born January 20th to February 18th. It's a 4-star day. You value a friend today or talking to a group. You might be involved in physical sports or competitive activities today. Tonight, friendships. And Pisces, those born February 19th to March 20th, it's a 4-star day. People notice you today. Some know personal details about your private life. Tonight, your high vis. And you are listening to a reading of articles from the Buffalo News for Sunday, June 28th on your Niagara Frontier Radio reading service. And we will return for more readings after this short break. Your readers today are
Edwin Vieira
and myself, Dan Arth.
Using our website, a podcast player like Spotify or iTunes, a streaming service like Siro, or a smart speaker. Did you know that we now have a dedicated app that can be downloaded to any mobile device, like a smartphone or tablet, for free? App users can conveniently access our live stream and any episode of our podcast easier than ever. To download the app, just type NFRRS in the search window in the Apple App Store or in the Google Play Store. Contact us anytime if you have any questions by calling 716-821-5555, extension 5. Thank you.
We'll continue now with our readings of articles from today's Buffalo News. Your readers are Dan Arth and
Edwin Vieira.
And our next story from the local news, NTSB airs details of fatal bus crash. Article by John Harris. In the moments before he lost control of the motor coach he was driving in Genesee County on August 22nd, 2025, Bin Shao noticed a non-empty water bottle that had rolled to the front of the vehicle. It rolled to his foot and affected his driving, Shao told an investigator. So Shao bent over to push it away or try to pick it up so it would not get stuck in his footwell near the gas and brake pedals. He managed to get a hold of the water bottle. I tried to throw the water bottle to the trash bin, but it bounced back, it bounced out, and in these few seconds the direction, I lost the control, Shao told the investigator through an interpreter a week after the crash in an interview at Erie County Medical Center where Shao was treated. Shao lost control about 12:20 p.m., just 35 minutes into the return trip from Niagara Falls to New York City. The bus ended up off the thruway on its right side near the Pembroke exit. 5 people were killed and dozens were injured. These details were included in 790 pages of documents released Friday afternoon by the National Transportation Safety Board, which continues to investigate the crash. The documents released Friday include only factual information and interviews with the driver and passengers aboard the bus. Analysis, probable cause, and contributing factors will be determined at the conclusion of the NTSB's investigation, which could still take another year. Shao, a 56-year-old from Flushing, Queens, early this year was criminally charged related to the crash. He faces 5 counts, each of manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide in Genesee County Court. In the documents released Friday, the NTSB said it obtained a sample of Shao's blood and it was negative for alcohol and drugs. Through an interpreter, Shao told the NTSB that he did not have health issues before the crash. His hearing and vision were good and he did not take any medications. A passenger interviewed by NTSB investigators shared his experience in the moments leading up to the crash. The passenger, who was seated in an aisle seat in the second row on the right side opposite the driver of the motor coach, said he believed an unopened water bottle had fallen from the front row. The passenger said the driver noticed the bottle, shook his head, then tried to grab it several times, even though it was far from his reach. As the driver did so, the passenger said he kept one hand on the steering wheel and eventually lost control of the motor coach. The last time, right before the accident, was what he did was very reckless. The passenger told the NTSB investigator, he's driving. This time before, it was like, oh, here's a water bottle. I'm driving with one hand and I'm trying to grab with the other hand. In addition, the same passenger said the driver did not give passengers a safety briefing on seat belts or the locations of emergency exit windows. The only thing the driver told passengers was not to walk on the bus during the ride, the passenger said. The motor coach was equipped with an inward and outward facing camera, which the NTSB used to determine Shao's actions leading up to the crash. The NTSB said the 7 video files it received were provided by M&Y Tours Inc., the Staten Island company that owned and operated the tour bus. Using the video, the NTSB was able to describe what happened from 11:50 a.m. to just after 12:20 p.m. August 22nd. Key moments in that log in hours, minutes, and seconds format from 12:18 to 12:18:51 seconds to 12:18:59 seconds. The driver makes 5 quick glances down to the right in the direction of his right foot. Motor coach is in the right lane, traveling 75 miles per hour. Speed limit is 65 miles per hour. 12:19, 26 seconds. 12:19, 27 seconds. Driver quickly glances further to the right side of his right foot. Bus is in the right lane, traveling 72 miles per hour. 12:20, 11 seconds to 12:20, 13 seconds. Driver looks down toward his right foot, following the movement of an object that is not in view of the camera. Bus is in the right lane, traveling 71 miles per hour. And it details additional timelines. But I'll turn it over to you, Edwin, for the next story.
Thank you. First phase of jury selection ends in Gendron death trial. The last of 1,074 potential jurors appeared Friday in federal court in Buffalo to fill out a questionnaire that will be used to help select a jury in the death penalty trial of Tops mass shooter Peyton Gendron. U.S. District Judge Lawrence Villardo summoned the potential jurors to the courthouse over the past 2 weeks, typically 62 in the morning and a similar number in the afternoon, and asked them to answer the questionnaire honestly and completely about their experiences, views, and feelings on a variety of topics. The integrity of the process depends on your truthfulness, Villardo told them. Prosecutors and Gendron's public defenders will spend the next month or so reviewing the questionnaire responses, and if the two sides agree a potential juror is not qualified to serve, and the judge agrees, that person will not be called back to the courthouse for the next part of the jury selection process. Villardo said he plans to interview qualified potential jurors in person beginning August 17th, aiming to have 12 jurors and 6 alternates seated in time to start the October trial. I think we accomplished a lot, Villardo said after he addressed the last group of jurors. Earlier this week, the judge said, I think we'll have a good number of people to talk to when the in-person process begins. Gendron has already admitted in state court to killing 10 black people in his racist attack at the Jefferson Avenue Tops supermarket on May 14, 2022. Gendron wounded 1 other black person and 2 white people in the attack. The gunman was sentenced in 2023 for those convictions to life in prison without possibility of parole. New York State does not have the death penalty, but federal law permits the government to prosecute and seek death for those charged with committing murder with a firearm while committing a federal hate crime. A federal grand jury returned a 27-count indictment against Gendron in July 2022, and the Justice Department announced in January 2024 it will seek the death penalty. For the past 2 weeks, the potential jurors saw Gendron in person, not wearing prison garb, as he sat between 2 of his lawyers in the courtroom. He did not say anything and remained in his chair through all of the proceedings, facing the judge in front of him and not making eye contact with the potential jurors to his left and behind him. Sometimes he whispered to one of his lawyers as the potential jurors were led into or out of the courtroom. Villardo told Mary Beth Covert and Teresa Duncan, 2 of Gendron's lawyers, who appeared with him Friday, that he wanted Gendron in the courtroom for all future proceedings, unless they have a good reason for him not to appear. Gendron's presence before the potential jurors the past 2 weeks marked the first time since April 2025 he appeared in court. Paul McQuillan, a death penalty opponent who watched Villardo instruct the potential jurors at several of the 17 courtroom sessions the past 2 weeks, said he found this part of the jury selection process to be fair and handled well, but he finds the ultimate purpose objectionable. We're doing all this for the sole purpose of putting an individual to death, said McQuillan, chair of the Western New York Coalition Against the Death Penalty. The judge excused about 24 potential jurors over the past 2 weeks, typically for medical reasons or their difficulty in understanding English. Villardo excused a potential juror whose family shopped at the Top store on Jefferson Avenue and felt, quote, triggered by coming to court to fill out the questionnaire. In an email to the court, that potential juror described the May 14, 2022 mass shooting as an attack of domestic terror against her East Side community. The person said just the thought of serving as a juror in the high-profile trial, during which graphic video from Gendron's camera will be submitted as evidence, would severely affect her emotionally.
Thanks, Edwin. And we'll stay with local stories. Our next story is a feature. New Yorkers with 2 homes can choose where to vote. Article by Jill Terreri Ramos. Voting where you live in the city or at your place in the countryside. Can New Yorkers with 2 homes really choose where to cast their ballot? A group called Move Indigo wants New York Democratic voters who have second homes to vote where their second homes are located if those properties are in swing districts. New York State law is clear, the group claims. Citizens with dual residencies have the right to choose where they want to vote. They do not have to vote where they maintain their primary residence. But is that true? The New York State Board of Elections publishes updates on state election law, and its 2026 guidance quotes a key court case from 1983, Ferguson versus McNabb. The case found that a person with two residencies may choose one to which she has legitimate, significant, and continuing attachments as her residence for purposes of the election law. New Yorkers with more than one residence can vote from one and only one. According to case law, this residence does not have to be a primary residence or a domicile, which is a permanent home, one suitable for year-round use. Judges have found that when voters can decide where to vote, it lessens the burdens on election staff, who in most cases need only verify an address, as well as the burden on voters with more than one residence who otherwise might be turned down at both places and have to go to court in order to be able to vote anywhere. A Board of Elections spokeswoman confirmed that New York State election law does permit an individual with two residences to choose one or the other to register to vote from, said Kathleen McGrath, Director of Public Information at the board. McGrath said the facts of each situation matter. New Yorkers may have multiple residencies but must only claim a right to vote from one, she said. We also consulted with election lawyer Jerry Goldfeder, senior counsel at Cozen O'Connor, on whether there are exceptions. The election law in New York is perfectly clear. Voters may choose from multiple residencies from which to vote as long as they are bona fide homes, Goldfeder said. A 2015 case, Moss versus Gabel, found that if a voter has a position on a political issue and that issue motivates them to register to vote in a place where he or she has established a bona fide residence, does not render such residence a sham. These laws, of course, do not permit voters to lie to a Board of Elections official or write down a fake address on voter registration forms. Some observers have questioned New York's more permissive approach. There have been few cases of false registration in New York, and the absence of such guidance gives people with multiple residences a greater chance of manipulating the rules, wrote Kevin Frazier, who has taught constitutional law in the Appalachian Journal of Law. Move Indigo provided relevant evidence from the Board of Elections on its website to support its claim. Our ruling, a group claims that voters with two homes in New York can vote at either one. New York State case law supports this claim, as does the State Board of Elections. It remains the case that voters cannot mislead elections officials, but when voters with two or more homes do follow the law, they are permitted to choose where they want to vote, even if that is for a politically motivated reason. We rate this claim true.
You're listening to a reading of today's Buffalo News on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. The time for our morning listeners is 10:14 a.m. For our afternoon listeners, the time is 5:14 p.m. And now to a feature story. Trump's takeover helped fracture a milestone birthday for America. When Next 250 organizers began planning for America's 250th birthday, they envisioned bringing together communities in a polarized country to celebrate democracy. Then Donald Trump returned to office. Now the left-leaning group has reframed its commemoration in response to Trump's takeover of the country's birthday. A communal festival in Washington, D.C. on Saturday, for instance, was expected to feature an indigenous opening ceremony, a march starting at what was once called Black Lives Matter Plaza, and voter registration booths. In seeking to put his stamp on the 250th, Trump has upended plans that had been years in the making, thrown agencies and federal funding behind his lavish patriotic vision, and drawn ire over what has become, in critics' eyes, a partisan celebration more about the president himself. It's a lost cause to expect anything unifying and exciting coming out of Washington, said John Deedle, president and chief executive of the American Association for State and Local History, a nonprofit that helped advise states on their 250th planning. Next 250 will hold its counter program down the street from the White House, as the National Mall is being used for Trump's Great American State Fair. The administration doesn't own the 250th anniversary, nor do they own the story of this country, said Linda Sarsauer, one of Next 250's organizers. Stepping in. The first inkling of Trump's takeover of the 250th came on a Friday in December when Trump rattled off programming for the nation's birthday in a video on the President's Truth Social account. The announcement arrived weeks after Trump had suffered an apparent setback. The man he picked to lead America 250, a nonprofit in charge of federal 250th celebrations overseen by a congressional panel, had just been fired. Trump's new nonprofit, Freedom 250, would ensure he got the July 4th celebrations he'd long desired. The organization also wouldn't have to abide by the same rules as America 250. While Freedom 250 is a nonpartisan subsidiary of the National Park Foundation, its activities are largely overseen by top Trump aides. Like America 250, it can maintain the anonymity of its donors. However, it's not overseen by a bipartisan panel. In May, Interior Secretary Doug Burgum told CNN's Dana Bash, Freedom 250 is, quote, run out of the White House and only the organization can decide to reveal its donors. But Richard Painter, a former White House ethics lawyer under President George W. Bush, said that he thought it was, quote, problematic the White House is forging relationships with nonprofits without congressional authorization. That arrangement has raised questions from watchdog groups and congressional Democrats who are now investigating Freedom 250's funding. A spokesperson for the National Park Foundation told CNN, quote, public and private Freedom 250 funds received or expended during the current fiscal year will be accounted for through NPF's standard financial reporting and audit processes. Freedom 250 lists about 24 sponsors on its website. A number of these, like Palantir, Lockheed Martin, and Oracle, have large federal contracts to provide data and defense services. Others, like Ultimate Fighting Championship and Penske Corporation, are led by Trump allies Dana White and Roger Penske. When asked whether the group would commit to publicly disclosing its donors, Freedom 250 CEO Keith Krach said, we're all about accountability and transparency. The Freedom 250 events have played to Trump's cultural tastes and given conservative groups a platform to shape the narrative around the celebrations, all to renew national pride. A fleet of 6 mobile museums called Freedom Trucks have traveled the country telling a story of the American Revolution through AI art and videos that say the foundational principles of America are rooted in the Western and Judeo-Christian traditions. The content was produced by conservative education organizations such as Hillsdale College and PragerU, which say they were not paid. In May, Freedom 250 organized a Christianity-focused prayer event on the National Mall, and the Patriot Games, a youth athletic contest where 2 teenage victors will split a $258,000 prize, is also on the books for August. After artists citing concerns over partisanship bailed on performing at the opening rally for the Great American State Fair, the president instead held a rally on Wednesday, where he was the headliner. The main July 4th event on the National Mall, called the Salute to America, is meant to feature a parade, military demonstrations, and other activities. But it's a broken celebration. Freedom 250 has taken steps to brand itself as the nonpartisan group leading the celebration of America's birthday in the public eye, putting it in competition with America 250 for the national spotlight, sponsors, and taxpayer funds. Congress has allocated $150 million for 250th celebrations this year in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, but America 250 has so far only received $25 million. Instead, federal records show $65 million has been sent to the National Park Foundation, which can distribute the funding to Freedom 250. Senator Lisa Murkowski, Republican of Alaska on the Congressional Commission, pressed Burgum during a congressional hearing about the lack of funds going towards America 250 in April. He told her Interior was, quote, working with the White House and that he would get back to her. Freedom 250 is a challenge to us, said Representative Bonnie Watson Coleman, Democrat of New Jersey, and who has been on the America 250 Commission since 2019. Freedom 250 serves the president, his politics, his donors, and his vanity projects. But America 250 is focused on making sure this is about our country, our people, moving forward, and our message to the next generations, she said. Freedom 250 has repeatedly defended Trump's involvement in the celebrations and said that presidents from Ulysses S. Grant in 1876 to Gerald Ford in 1976 have long played a role in commemoration of the nation's funding.
Our next feature story, cheaper housing could come at a deadlier cost. Safety experts worry as states change their fire codes. Article by Robbie Sekira. States and cities are loosening building code requirements in an effort to lower construction costs and boost affordable housing. Some of these changes include allowing low-rise apartment buildings to have just one stairway, reducing how often building codes are updated, and rolling back specific electrical or fire safety standards. But critics have raised safety concerns, noting that existing rules were shaped by past tragedies and aimed to prevent future harm. For example, having only one staircase could allow a developer to add another unit or expand the size of units, said Nicole Aub, principal and founder of Civics, a planning and civil engineering consulting firm and an American Planning Association board member. But then there's this flip side, that by removing these codes and protections, it carries this additional risk for the developer and the occupants of the building if the worst case scenario happens, she said. Many states are considering single stairway apartment laws. They generally take one of four approaches, said Alex Horowitz, housing policy director at the Pew Charitable Trust. Begin with a study, allow single stairway buildings statewide, update the state building code while letting local governments opt out, or give localities authority to allow them. Pew has lobbied for and testified in favor of the changes. Two national developments could make it easier for more states and cities to allow single stairway buildings, Horowitz said. The first are proposed updates by the International Code Council, the organization that develops the model codes many states use as the basis for their building rules. An update to its multifamily code, for example, would allow single stairway buildings to add a fourth story. Second, the bipartisan 21st Century Road to Housing Act moving through Congress would direct the Department of Housing and Urban Development to develop model guidelines for residential buildings with a single stairway not exceeding 6 stories. According to Pew, 19 states and Washington, D.C. introduced bills between 2022 and 2025 to study or allow single stairway apartment buildings, and 7 states passed them last year alone. This year, Idaho enacted a new law that allows local governments to permit certain apartment buildings to use one stairway, generally up to 6 stories without an occupiable roof, or 5 stories with one, along with limits on units per floor, sprinklers, stair width, and smoke and fire detection. Colorado's law, enacted last year, requires certain municipalities to modify their building codes by December 1st, 2027, to allow 5-story multifamily residential buildings to be served by a single exit. Texas's 2025 law lets municipalities authorize single stairway apartment buildings up to 6 stories. Colorado State Representative Andrew Bosnecker, a Democrat who sponsored the new law, came to this issue because the state needed to find a way to make smaller multifamily projects more feasible. He said the policy can help on infill lots where a traditional two-stairway apartment building may not fit. Single stairway or smart stairway buildings are not only a very safe way to build multifamily housing, they also bring a product to market that's just not being offered, Bosnecker said. Colorado's one of 16 states without a statewide building code, making local implementation a major focus. Bosnecker said lawmakers had to look at ways that you can make it feasible through local governments to adopt this standard into their building code. He said the work to get the support of those skeptical of single staircase legislation happened a year prior to the bill's passage, when lawmakers worked with fire chiefs, fire marshals, and firefighters unions for about a year to get them to a neutral position on the bill.
Parent worried distant child, age 21, won't be part of wedding. It's asking Eric. Dear Eric, my 21-year-old child responds only sporadically to texts and phone calls, often going days or weeks without a response. They live across the country with their other parent during the summers and holidays. When I get the chance to see them face to face, which is once a year if I'm lucky, it's as if no time has passed and has the same warm, loving feeling it always has. Not talking to them or being invited into their life has me confused and sad. How to deal with or heal the lack of communication aside, I'm planning on asking my partner to marry me, and I'm not sure how to communicate this to my child and how to approach their presence at my nuptials. My partner is not keen on the idea of a wedding without all of our children there. My child's lack of response combined with their non-committal attitude toward a visit with me makes planning a small family wedding a difficult task. Do I proceed with a wedding/marrying someone that makes me truly happy without my child in attendance? From happy about the future, but missing my kid. Dear Happy, it's possible your kid is in a transitional phase of life and still figuring out how to manage time and balance priorities. Parent-child relationships are often taken for granted as the child grows into adulthood, and both sides have to readjust to different expectations. So it'll be helpful for you to take the lead on coaching your kid into the next stage of your relationship. That might look like having an open, no-fault conversation about what you'd like, be it more visits, a regular call day/time, or something else. This will probably take some trial and error, but voicing your desires, you empower your kid to step up and meet you in the middle. Even if this is less than a smooth process, you needn't put your wedding plans on hold. Indeed, you can use the upcoming wedding as a catalyst, telling your kid the news and making specific asks about their presence and participation. If you, for instance, want your kid to develop a stronger bond with your partner and the other kids prior to the wedding, you can say so and suggest a trip or even a series of Zoom calls to facilitate that. Dear Eric, my husband and I always disagree about when to throw out food. This has been a 21-year battle. He went to a 4-day conference and left our dogs ground chicken, which made them very sick for 3 days. I was furious and disposed of everything in the freezer over a year old or undated, out-of-date refrigerator items or canned goods. I replaced everything I remembered with grocery delivery and told him my credit card was available to him for whatever else he wanted to replace. He returned home and had a massive tantrum between verbally berating me and the silent treatment for 3 days. I've shown him food safety charts from the health department, offered to change grocery chores with him, you name it. When offering solutions, keep in mind, we're not impoverished, we have separate bank accounts, divide expenses, and I cannot physically grocery shop because I'm extremely mobility impaired. Please advise, from Waste or Waste Not. Dear Waste Not, there's no reason nor excuse for him to berate you about this. That's unacceptable. Food may not go bad on the exact sell-by date, but it does go bad, and you and your poor dogs experience that. Furthermore, since you paid to replace the food, he doesn't really have anything to grouse about, save for any perceived salvageable food. What I don't see in your letter is his metric for judging a food item's safety. If you don't know it, ask him. How does he judge food if it's still good enough to eat? Clearly you both have different standards, so one option may be to simply agree to disagree and separate your food just as you do your bank accounts. He needs to acknowledge that part of your frustration stems from being left to care for and clean up after the dogs. That's not the flint, but that's not the kindling. That's the flint, but that's not the kindling. However, he has to figure out a different way to communicate with you about this. If you can't agree on when food is no longer good, then you should agree on measures you both can take so that it doesn't come up in conversation anymore. This isn't ideal, but lightning rod subjects tend to indicate areas where a couple would benefit from a neutral third party to help them sort through what the other is saying. If you can't agree to disagree, see if he'll agree to talk about it with you and a therapist.
And you're listening to a reading of today's Buffalo News on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. The time is 10:30 a.m. for those listening in the morning and 5:30 p.m. for afternoon listeners. Moving over to sports. Just hours after meeting, Buffalo warms to Rudolph. Daxon Rudolph had never been to Buffalo before the NHL Combine earlier this month. He didn't meet with the Buffalo Sabres during that trip to Western New York, where teams sized him up and down as a pro prospect, putting him through meetings with executives and a litany of physical testing. He finally met with the Sabres on Friday morning, hours ahead of the NHL draft at KeyBank Center. Then, with the number 4 overall pick Friday night, the Sabres selected Rudolph, a defenseman from Prince Albert of the Western Hockey League. The Sabres later picked Ilya Morozov, the center from Miami, Ohio, by way of Russia at number 20, then turned their attention to rounds 2 to 7. The draft continues at 11 a.m. Saturday. I spoke with them this morning, said Rudolph, the first defenseman selected in the draft. That was my interview with them and their staff, and I kind of realized that could be a possibility that I would be selected. I actually walked over to the rink here today and went up to their office this morning to meet with them. That was my first meeting, other than some little stuff after games. It's cool. Definitely something you don't hear too often. The Buffalo Sabres kept the number 4 pick rather than trade it, and they continued to stockpile their defense in their farm system. They added size and a scoring touch with Rudolph, a 6'2", 205-pounder from Lacombe, Alberta. Rudolph scored 28 goals, including 6 game-winning goals with 50 assists, and was a plus 36 in 68 games in 2025 to 2026 with Prince Albert. He scored 27 points in the WHL playoffs, 9 goals with 18 assists, and tied for first in WHL playoff assists and first in playoff scoring. For me, as a player, being at both ends of the ice is really important, Rudolph said. I see myself as a two-way guy who can create offense and make plays, but also play big minutes and be a hard defender. Rudolph was also the first defenseman drafted in a class that's laden with talent at the position, including Albert Smits of Latvia, Carson Corrales of Prince George of the WHL, and Chase Reed of Sault Ste. Marie of the Ontario Hockey League. In fact, Smits, Corrales, and Reed went 5, 6, 7 after Rudolph. The D-core in that draft is very elite and talented guys, Rudolph said. I'm buddies with a lot of them. To be selected as the first defenseman, that's a good feeling and something I'll never forget. Rudolph has committed to play college hockey at the University of Denver. It's unclear whether he will join Denver for the fall as a freshman or go straight to the Sabres as a first-round draft pick. But he said he committed to the Pioneers, who play in the National Collegiate Hockey Conference and won the national championship in April. Playing against older competition and stronger, more structured hockey, the WHL was so good for me, but I think it's time now for a new challenge, Rudolph said. For me to go into Denver and compete in the best conference in college hockey is something that I really look forward to continue to improve. Rudolph, originally projected to be drafted between the 7th and 9th spots, joins an organization that made the Stanley Cup playoffs for the first time since 2011. First class, Rudolph said, describing his impression of the Buffalo Sabres. I loved watching them play in the playoffs this year. They had a really good team. That was so much fun to watch. Being selected by them is a special feeling. The Sabres had clearly placed an emphasis on defensemen, both through the draft in the last 3 years and even in trades this week. The Sabres have drafted 11 defensemen in the last 3 years of their 25 picks in that span. That includes 2025 first-round pick Radim Murtka, third-round pick David Bedkowski, and 2024 second-round pick Adam Kleber. Earlier in the week, the Sabres traded for defenseman Olin Zellweger from Anaheim and Luis Crevier from Chicago. Always draft the best player available. That's our philosophy. Sabres general manager Jarmo Kekalainen said, if you have too many good defensemen, that's a great problem to have. There's going to be 31 teams that call me, and if they need a defenseman, they know who to call. And if we need a forward, make a trade.
News from the World Cup. Tournament opens U.S. eyes to soccer's roar around the globe. Evan Hand had seen viral sports moments before, but the one that changed how he understood soccer's reach didn't come from a superstar. It came from Vozina, Cape Verde's 40-year-old goalkeeper, whose 7-save performance in a goalless draw against heavily favored Spain turned him into an overnight social media sensation. The big moment for me was the Vozina thing, said Hand, a sports content creator. It was seeing this dude again, 15 million followers basically, overnight, play for a team where if you were to look at a map, you wouldn't be able to tell me where Cape Verde is right now. NFL star Tom Brady has less followers than this guy, and he had arguably the most dominant run in the history of sports, so that was a moment for me. For many American sports fans, the World Cup has delivered a similar jolt. As fans from around the world pack stadiums, television audiences surge, and U.S. supporters crowd fan festivals and sports bars, the tournament has offered a vivid reminder that soccer is not a niche sport trying to crack the American mainstream. It is the world's dominant game, and the United States is still catching up to its scale. The tournament is already on pace for record attendance. Through the first 44 matches, total attendance topped 2.85 million, with stadiums averaging about 99.6% capacity, according to a Reuters analysis based on FIFA data. Fox's broadcast of the U.S. win over Australia drew 16.2 million viewers, a figure likely to be surpassed as the Americans move into the knockout rounds. I think for a lot of people who always thought the sport was boring, they're finding out it's exciting, said Bob Dorfman, a sports marketing analyst, and that's helped the game. Global passion. The tournament's impact in the United States may be measured as much in emotion as ratings. Dorfman said American fans are being exposed not only to elite players, but to the passion of traveling supporters and immigrant communities who treat the World Cup as something closer to a national holiday than a sporting event. In the U.S., there's all these foreigners coming in or immigrants who are here that are just going nuts over it, he said. And I think to some extent the U.S. citizens are a little jealous of the Scottish fans and the Brazilians. I was watching the Brazil game yesterday, and I had a lump in my throat watching them sing their national anthem. The emotion is huge. The excitement is huge. The big stars playing that Americans are finally getting a closer look at. Hand said his World Cup videos are doing, quote, leaps and bounds better than his regular content that typically focuses on sports like college football and golf. It's not that we didn't know soccer was big, he said. I don't think we knew the true scale of exactly how big soccer is. Every single person through the rest of the world, even if they're from some random town in Brazil or Siberia, they know soccer, and they love soccer. They'll die for that game. U.S. enthusiasm growing. Outside Los Angeles Stadium before Thursday's U.S. versus Turkey match, fans created a carnival atmosphere, singing songs, pounding drums, and setting off red, white, and blue smoke bombs. The success so far of the U.S. team in the tournament, winning its first 2 matches and topping its group, has spurred enthusiasm. Alicia Rutz, a former player dressed as Wonder Woman heading into the game with her husband, who came dressed as fictional coach Ted Lasso, said Americans have begun appreciating the sport's smaller details. It's so fun to see Americans get soccer and love soccer, Rutz said. They're cheering for not just goals, they're cheering for the right things, the right moves, the right touches, and it's so fun to see Americans adopt soccer and love it. Still, the idea of a soccer breakthrough in the United States is nearly as old as the modern American game itself. Hosting the 1994 Men's World Cup, the growth of Major League Soccer, and the success of the U.S. women's national team each brought predictions the sport was ready to claim a permanent place beside the country's most powerful leagues. We've seen this a lot of times in the U.S., Rutz said, but I think it could finally happen. Youth programs are taking off throughout the country, and it could finally be something equivalent to NFL football, which I would love to see.
And our next sports story, Scheffler's 60 gives him 2-shot lead. Scotty Scheffler bumped in a par putt at number 18 for a second round 60 to stand atop the leaderboard at 16 under through 36 holes of the Travelers Championship on Friday at Cromwell, Connecticut. Scheffler missed a long birdie by mere inches to the right on the par 4 18th before tapping in for the 10 under 60, one better than Norway's Victor Hovland, 61 on Friday, and two better than Akshay Bhattia's second round, 62. Hovland is alone in second, two back of Scheffler at 14 under. Bhatia ended the day in a tie for third at 12 under with Eric Cole, 65. After birdie in 15, I was kind of like, oh yeah, maybe 9 under now, a few more, you could shoot 59, Scheffler said. At the end of the day, I was very focused on just my execution out there. I've put myself in position now this week. Go home, get some rest, and get ready for tomorrow, Scheffler said. Heavy rain led to soft greens and low scoring at TPC River Highlands on Friday, a common theme in the second round, albeit nothing entirely novel at the event. With a round of 60, Scheffler ties Patrick Cantlay and Tommy Bolt back in 1954 for the top second round. Jim Furyk shot a 58 in 2016, holds the tournament single round scoring record, and Cameron Young posted a 59 in the third round 2 years ago. The conditions were really good this morning. Softer golf course, not as much wind, Scheffler said. Going out yesterday in the afternoon when the greens get firm out here and the winds start to blow, it can get tricky pretty quickly. Yeah, going out this morning, you definitely had a feeling the conditions were going to be easier, so you need to go out there and try and take advantage of it, he said. After opening with a birdie Friday, Scheffler made a bogey 5 at the second. The missed 6-footer on the par 4 was arguably his last mistake Friday before shifting into overdrive. He had 10 birdies on his final 16 holes in the second round, with matching scores of 30 on the front and back 9 in his bid to win the event for the second time in 3 years. Hovland was 9 under on Friday with a 30 on the front 9 and a highlight eagle on the par 5 13th. It was awesome stuff today, said Hovland, who tied his career low round on tour. Obviously been kind of battling some stuff, my golf swing had not felt all that comfortable, but I felt like things stabilized a lot more today, and I was able to put the ball in the fairway, hit some great iron shots, and putter finally cooperated a little bit more today. Bhatia walked off the course earlier with the lead before Hovland and Scheffler closed out the round emphatically. He had 4 birdies on each 9 in a bogey-free trip around River Highlands, including putts from outside 26 feet at numbers 3 and 10. I feel like I've putted really good the whole year, Bhatia said. I went through a stretch where when the greens were as good or consistent, even though I hit good putts, they just weren't going in. I feel like I kind of showed up this week, did my same stuff, and my speed has been really good this week. I've had pretty stress-free putts. Englishman Matt Fitzpatrick had a late afternoon run undone by bogeys at numbers 16 and 18. He settled for a 66 and a tie for 5th at 10 under with Bud Cauley and Ben Griffin, each of whom also posted a 66. There was no 36-hole cut at the 72-man signature event. Notables down the board include defending champion Keegan Bradley, 65, and U.S. Open champ Wyndham Clark, 64, at 8 under. PGA Championship winner Aaron Ra of England, 68 at 7 under, and Justin Thomas, 66 at 6 under. Pride snags lead. Dickie Pride birdied his final 3 holes to shoot a 9 under par 63 and open the lead at the Dick's Open in Endicott.
What stands out after seeing the new stadium? It's the Bills mailbag from Jay Skursky. Let's get right to your questions. Jim Mayer asks, I assume at this point you've toured the new Bills stadium. I'd like to see your thoughts about the highlights of the new stadium from a sports writer's perspective and how you think the fans will react. From Jay, Tuesday's ribbon-cutting ceremony was my first time in the new stadium. The Bills have had previous media tours, most recently in March, but I've had conflicts that prevented me from attending, so I was eager to make it inside the new stadium Tuesday. My immediate reaction was, this is going to be a whole new world for Bills fans. The old Highmark Stadium had its charm, for sure, but getting to see every other NFL stadium as part of this job made it woefully clear how behind the Bills were when it compared to the rest of the league in terms of amenities offered. Some people in Buffalo don't care about that, which is fine. They just want a place to tailgate and watch a game. If the new stadium can keep the fabric of the tailgates together, fans are going to be blown away by how nice the place is, especially if they've never been to another NFL city. What's really stood out to me was how vertical the seats are. I really don't think there'll be a bad seat in the building. The roof also will do a decent job of keeping at least some of the crowd dry. It wasn't all that windy Tuesday, so it's hard to know about the wind confusion system that's supposed to mitigate that element. The concourses, the views, and the amenities are all going to be massive upgrades for the fans. Of course, so too are the ticket prices. That's the unfortunate downside, but it's the cost of having an NFL team. James asks, your decision to leave Jim Kelly off your top 5 Bills draft picks made me wonder about his USFL Houston statistics. Are his first 2 years as a pro included or excluded when his career statistics are totaled, documented in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and ranked among NFL great players? From Jay, Kelly's USFL stats don't count in his official NFL numbers. That's true of any player from the USFL. They're also not included on research websites like Pro Football Reference. Kelly's bio on the Pro Football Hall of Fame website makes mention of his 2 seasons there, but mostly focuses on his 11 seasons in Buffalo. Greg Nichols asks, I would make the analogy that right guard Osiris Torrance is like the motor on your refrigerator. No one gives it much thought. You just expect it to do what it's supposed to, doesn't get any attention, and is taken for granted way too much. Torrance is that way. He doesn't take penalties, doesn't create drama, and I believe I've heard him interviewed just one time. He just quietly does his job in somewhat anonymity. With that in mind, I strongly feel Brandon Beane should get an extension done with him, as he's very dependable as a component of the offensive line. Do you see this occurring? From Jay, it's an interesting topic, Greg, but Beane does not have a history of paying big money to the guard position. David Edwards walked this offseason as a free agent, and the Bills look like they'll replace him with either Alec Anderson or Austin Corbett, who signed a 1-year contract as a free agent worth a little less than $1.5 million. Edwards, on the other hand, signed a 4-year deal with the Saints worth potentially $61 million. If Torrance ends up commanding that kind of contract and the top-paid guard in the NFL now make in the neighborhood of $20 million per year, it's fair to wonder if the Bills will have the cap space available to accommodate it. Given Beane's track record at the position, it would be a break from the norm to see him sign a guard to that type of deal.
In our next sports article, Sabres made 2 picks but must still make trade. Article by Mike Harrington. I would not have bet a nickel that the Sabres were going to actually make both picks at numbers 4 and 20 in the NHL draft on Friday night at KeyBank Center. There had to be a deal out there, but nothing came to fruition. General Manager Jarmo Kekalainen, in charge of his first draft in Buffalo, was methodical in his process, and it's pretty easy to find folks who follow these things who would tell you he did very well taking Prince Albert defenseman Daxon Rudolph and Miami of Ohio center Ilya Morozov with his 2 choices. But the names folks wanted to hear were ones we know: Matthew Nyes, Robert Thomas, Connor Hellebuck. You get the picture. None of them moved to Buffalo or anywhere else, at least not yet. As we wake on June 27th, the Sabres are not as good as they were on May 18th, the night they lost Game 7 to Montreal in the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Take Alex Tuch and Bowen Byram off that roster, and that's an easy point to make. We made it clear we were looking at all options, Kekalainen said in his meeting with reporters late Friday night at 1 Bills Drive, where the Sabres brass is holed up for the weekend. I contacted all the other teams in the league to make sure they knew all our options were open, but nothing was attractive enough for us to do anything else but pick. Kekalainen said he knew Friday morning that the Sabres were going to hold on to the 4th pick, but was still working to make some moves on the 20th pick. Nothing materialized. As for number 4, he said he would only trade that pick for someone who was a long-term NHL player. Several reports Friday said the Sabres had been pushing hard for Hellebuyck, and that's a dalliance I'm not a huge fan of. He's 33 years old, coming off the worst season of his career with an .895 save percentage, and has been patently lousy in his recent trips to the playoffs. Hellebuyck has a lot of mileage on his body and several great seasons on his resume, including 3 that ended in Vezina Trophy victories. But you have to wonder if his career is on the downward side and not be fooled by what we saw in the Olympics when he won a gold medal playing behind a superstar team. From this view, the Sabres needed help on defense and have done well getting Louis Crevier from Chicago, as well as on Friday's deal for intriguing Olin Zellweger from Anaheim. He might be slotted to start the season as Owen Power's new partner. For all the folks who spent this season foolishly crabbing a team that was 5th in the NHL in goals, needed another top 6 forward, now you can probably make your case. Counting on more improvement from the likes of Zach Benson, Josh Doan, and Jack Quinn, step-up seasons from Konsta Helenius and Noah Ostlund, as well as the return of Yuri Kulik, is asking for a lot of things to go right. A trade or free agent signing, Patrick Kane, seems to be in order for Buffalo's top 9. As for the draft itself, Rudolph wasn't a candidate to be the first defenseman off the board, but Kekalainen is known to let his scouts do their work and to formulate his own list. The way he feels is that if they're thinking outside the box, the more power to them. 10 years ago in Buffalo, remember, Kekalainen was the GM in Columbus when the Blue Jackets stunned the hockey world by taking center Pierre-Luc Dubois at number 3 overall. To him, mock drafts are just exercises. I did amateur scouting direction with St. Louis for 11 drafts, and I was fortunate that I always worked with a general manager that didn't stick his fingers in the process, Kekalainen said. I can't get to see these guys enough to form a solid opinion about how they are as players, but we have a great scouting staff.
And now over to the scoreboard. Friday's results from the American League. Detroit shut out Houston 8-0. Texas beat out Toronto 5-4, and Seattle beat Cleveland 3-1. Boston took on the Yankees, and it was a 6-1 victory for the Red Sox. The White Sox beat Kansas City 22-1, and the Athletics beat the Angels 9-3. In the National League, Cincinnati won against Pittsburgh 6-4. Philadelphia versus the Mets was 2-1 in a Philadelphia victory. Milwaukee beat out the Chicago Cubs 6-2, and Miami shut out St. Louis 4-0. San Diego won against the LA Dodgers 7-1, and Atlanta versus San Francisco 3-1, Atlanta for the win. In the Interleague, Baltimore beat Washington 3-1, Tampa Bay beat Arizona 6-1, and Minnesota won against Colorado 9-8 in 10 innings. For Sunday's games, it'll be Texas at Toronto at 1:37 p.m., Houston at Detroit, and Seattle at Cleveland, both at 1:40, Kansas City and the Chicago White Sox at 2:10, the Athletics versus the Angels will be at 3:15, and the Yankees will be at Boston at 7:20. For National League games, Cincinnati will be at Pittsburgh at 1:35, Philadelphia will be at the New York Mets in the city at 1:40, the Chicago Cubs at Milwaukee will be 2:10 p.m., and Miami at St. Louis is 2:15. Atlanta at San Francisco is 4:05 p.m., and the Dodgers at San Diego is 4:10. For the interleague games, it'll be Washington at Baltimore at 1:35, Arizona at Tampa Bay at 1:40, and Colorado at Minnesota at 2:10 p.m. And in World Cup games, Friday's results saw France beat up Norway 4-1. Senegal versus Iraq was a shutout 5-0 for Senegal, but Cape Verde versus Saudi Arabia was a draw at 0-0. Spain versus Uruguay was 1-0 for Spain's single point. Egypt and Iran saw a draw at 1-1 each, and Belgium versus New Zealand was 5-1. For today's game of South Africa versus Canada at 3 p.m., that'll be played in Inglewood, California. Tomorrow's games for Brazil versus Japan at 1 p.m. is in Houston. Germany versus Paraguay at 4:30 will be in Foxborough, Massachusetts, and Netherlands versus Morocco at 9 p.m. is in Monterrey, Mexico. Tuesday's games in the Ivory Coast versus Norway at 1 p.m. is in Arlington, Texas. France versus Sweden will be at 5 p.m. at the MetLife Center in East Rutherford, New Jersey, and Mexico versus to-be-announced team at 9 p.m. in Mexico City. You're listening to a reading of today's Buffalo News. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Buffalo News for Sunday, June 28th. We read from the Buffalo News live on weekday and Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. and rebroadcast at 4 p.m. For more information, please call us at 716-821-5555. That number again being 716-821-5555. Your readers for today have been
Dan Arth
and Edwin Vieira. Thank you for listening.
If you or people you know shop at any of the Dash's supermarkets, please save Dash's register tapes for radio reading. Our agency receives $2 for every $100 in Dash's register tapes. Radio reading has raised thousands of dollars so far. Anyone can drop off their Dash's tapes to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service at 1199 Harlem Road, Cheektowaga, between William and Clinton Streets. Or Dash's tapes can be mailed to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service at 1199 Harlem Road, Cheektowaga, New York, 14227. Any questions on Dash's tapes for radio reading? Call us at 716-821-5555, and thanks for caring. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability.